What? Hi, everybody. Thanks for viewing our video today. We're doing a Austin market spotlight. This is brought by popular request and demand. When I inquired through our long distance real estate Facebook group about what market people want to learn about the most right now. And Austin was repeated more than a few times. So I have a great speaker, very knowledgeable speaker here for you today, and I'll get to him in just a second. But if this is your first time seeing one of our market spotlights, my name is Jennifer Ward, and I'm your host with the Long Distance Real Estate Investors Facebook group. And a little bit about me, I live in Denver, but invest in Indianapolis for the last 3 years. We have a few long-term rentals there, and I have experience flipping some houses here in Denver and currently in Indianapolis. I've done live-in flips, I do house hacking currently, and we're looking for a short-term rental as well. So just kind of touching every strategy out there. So enough about me. Let me introduce or welcome as well our co-host, Raina Bias.
Hi, everyone. So I also am a long distance investor. I live in Denver, same city as Jen, and then I invest in Birmingham and also Memphis. Most of our properties are in Memphis. We do some flips, but mostly we do the BRRRR method. And I'm super excited about today's speaker because he is going to be speaking about Austin, which is a place very, very near and dear to both Jen and I's heart because both went to University of Texas in Austin. And I think that we both wish that we had bought a lot of properties back then. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Raina. So our guest speaker today is Bryan Noth, and he is a realtor in Austin as well as an investor. So best of both worlds we have here today. And he has his own team, the Noth team, with All City Brokerage. So I'm so excited to have Bryan here. We've already had a preliminary conversation, and he just has a wealth of knowledge and great perspective on if you want to get started in the Austin market. So Bryan, welcome. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all. Especially since it's near and dear to both of you. This is exciting.
Yes, definitely. So if you can, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and, you know, how long you've been in Austin, what got you into real estate, and what you've been doing so far.
Oh, gosh. So been in Austin for the better part of 20 years. Left for college for a couple of years, came back. I've lived really all over the city, north, south, east, west. We settled down in Southwest now. It's kind of the pocket we really like. In terms of kind of getting into it, so we got into real estate investing probably really kind of heavily about 7-8 years ago. I had graduated, I got my doctorate actually, and I was working as a physical therapist. Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether that's like a good wow or a bad wow. But...
Well, I used to work in higher ed and I did a master's. So anybody who does a doctorate, I'm just like, wow.
So we did that and started plugging along, and we started getting into real estate investing, started picking up a few properties, and then it just really became like a passion. And then as we were going into that, it just, you wanted to be able to help more people do the same thing, right? Because in truth, like when you get to work in this part, you work with like usually people that have really good goals, are driven, have like just very great frame of mind that are usually like-minded. It's fun. You talk to these people and it's a great crowd to know and to work with. So it feels like cheating calling it work, but that's what we get to do. So we got into that side and we've continued on both of those. So we run the team on the real estate side as a realtor, and I also do investing as well, and primarily buy and holds. We've done some BRRRRs, we've done some flips. I try to stay away from those because they take a lot of time. And it's kind of where we've moved away from. But primarily buy and hold, single family and small multifamily is what we kind of do here in the Austin area.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for giving that recap. So I want to dive into, so for the people who are really intrigued about the Austin market, when I started researching about what market I wanted to invest in, I had to think first about why I was investing, what outcome I wanted from it. And for us, for my family, we're trying to invest in real estate so we can generate a cash flow to then live on and be able to leave our 9-to-5 jobs. So in your opinion, what's going to be the best strategy? What kind of investor should consider Austin?
I love that, by the way. If you're like why there, that's so good. So for Austin, I mean, the nice part with real estate is you guys kind of know you can make money a lot of different ways. I think for Austin though, when people talk, I'm like, for most people, the short-term gain is probably the hardest to play here. People that are looking to get out, especially under 12 months and really under 24 months. That's a lot tougher to do, especially because Austin is a buzz city. A lot of people know about it. A lot of people are drawn to it. It's really hard to come in here, break into the market and just crush it in doing short-term work. The data just came out actually this last month, and it was talking about the median return on flips is the lowest it's been since they've started really recording that data in 20 years. So we're just seeing that short-term market and that short-term play get harder and harder and harder. It still works. And if you have a great team, if you know what you're doing, if you have experience, good connections, awesome. Primarily, I'd say the longer-term game is what works, right? And is just to hit on what you guys said at the top of this one, I wish we'd have bought properties back then. Everybody says that. I'm like, well, that can just be you in 10 years if you start buying now, but it has to work for that specific investor and that goal. Like you said, if it's to replace passive income and you're trying to do that in a short term, Austin's a tough one. If you're like, hey, we're planning 15 years down the road, I'm like, that actually will probably line up pretty well. So I think the longer term game is really probably the easier one. And then maybe a small caveat being people that can do house hacking, or if you can get in, because if you do live in the area, being able to buy with a low interest rate is really powerful. It's just not scalable very quickly. It's going to be really hard to repeat that. If you're looking to scale, that's a great strategy 5-10 years. It's not great if you're trying to make big impact waves in a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, since most of our viewers are doing this long distance, so they're considering, staying where they are and invest in Austin. So we're talking about long-term strategy is going to be your best bet because I guess the appreciation game is so strong there. And so we're talking about having long-term buy and holds, it sounds like. What about people who want to try to do the short-term rental game and holding on to it, for as long as they would a traditional buy and hold? What are the restrictions around short-term rental in Austin?
Pretty heavy, actually. That's really been the biggest Achilles heel for people that want to look at that strategy. And in general, I'm like, it's just Austin's going to fight you on it. The short answer is they don't give short-term rental licenses to non-owner occupied homes. You really have to have a primary residence here.
Right.
Now, that is true for Austin. If you go anywhere around Austin, that works. Round Rock's picking up a lot right now, Cedar Park, both of those to the northeast, northwest. Those are really starting to pick up because they don't have the same rules. But the true city of Austin, very punishing to people trying to do short-term rentals. There are some options like condo towers that are specifically designated for short-term rentals, but then your entire competition is the whole building. I'm like, that's tough. And as the market grows, that probably won't matter as much. But the short-term rental, that's really tough in the city proper, especially I should say, if you're trying to do it above board. If you're okay doing it without getting a license, that's a proceed at your own risk. But I think in the city of Austin, it's very challenging for out-of-state investors. But the outskirts have some really great options if people are looking to try to do short-term rental.
Do you know if the outskirts cities like Round Rock, what their council thinks of short-term rentals and how they're viewing everything?
They're pretty open to it. Yeah, it's really pretty easy to acquire, and most everywhere around here. You had down to Dripping Springs in the Southwest. They used to do a lot of vacation rentals and a lot of like wedding venue rentals, because you go into the wine country out that direction. So it's really pretty. You got the hills, and then you go to the lake if you go a little more north. So there was a lot over that direction, but really all around, the rules are pretty lax. It's pretty easy to get short-term rentals out there.
Yeah, and and I guess we'll kind of go, we should probably maybe step next into the next question about just kind of like the whole landscape of Austin and what's around it and how these smaller cities work, because, I'll say that what these cities, these little suburbs or little, they're not quite little anymore, but like Round Rock is considered like a suburb of Austin. There's Leander, Cedar Park, those are north. When you are in Austin, it all looks like it's just one big city. There's not any sort of gap really at all in between these northern suburbs, at least. And then, and Austin is on the I-35, right on I-35, which leads right straight down to San Marcos and San Antonio. And that, and San Antonio and Austin are really only an hour away, I guess, without traffic on I-35, and that's all becoming populated and more industries and growth. So it's like, if anybody knows about Dallas Fort Worth being the DFW, it's kind of forming into that. Right?
Yeah, it's really well said. They have a planning committee that talks about like growth over time, and most of Texas's growth actually occurs within 50 miles of I-35. And really, it's the three big cities, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas. They're planning out the growth of San Antonio and Austin, and they expect that by about 2030, it will just be the San Antonio, Austin Metroplex area, because you're seeing that fill-in being so much. And if you look on a map, if you look at Dallas-Fort Worth, and then you just take that same scale and rotate it, San Antonio and Austin are almost the same distance apart.
Yeah.
It's a little bit further, but we've got, New Braunfels and San Marcos were two of the fastest growing cities in the United States per percentage gain in the last year. So it's very likely that we'll see probably by 2030 that corridor fill in quite a bit.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, it's crazy. So for those, who are wanting to pursue the short-term rental strategy, I think just focusing on those suburbs right around the core of Austin is going to be your best bet. So, yeah, wow. And then like flipping, as we've talked about before, that's just going to be really hard to do because of just like it's hard to buy houses at a deep discount, number one, to make your returns. Plus, what I'm learning, I don't think it matters where you live, where you're investing. Contractors are so hard to find that can do it on your timeline. So I know you've done a few flips, but I imagine that's a problem too. So
I think you're right. I think everywhere that's a really tough one. And we're not immune to that here. I think we talked about that, right? You have like the 3 rules of contracting, and you can only pick 2, which is you can have good work, cheap work, and fast work, but you can't have all 3.
Yeah.
Right. So if you pick which 2 you want, and you'll get it. And it's hard it was really hard, I should say, for Austin. So we saw a really interesting pattern as we went into COVID, where the market slowed down, but people were still moving here. And if you watched inventory, it just started to shrink. And when we moved into around December, it just hit this like hyperdrive where there was nothing. Nothing was available, and the market just exploded, and growth really caught up. As we looked into kind of coming in the summer, people would ask, what's the ARV? And you're like, I don't know, because people are bidding crazy numbers. That's hard for the short-term play. For the flip, I'm like, you're making up your ARV. You really are. And that's where I think it was dangerous. And people that have really solid pipelines, really great relationships with these, mega wholesalers, different. But for the one-off person that's trying to do a flip, it's a little bit harder. And there's strategies I've used for that I like. So one of the things I like is target stuff that's been on the MLS for more than like 10 days. Right. That means it's been looked
10
at
days.
and passed over. 10 days. Yeah. 10 days. So been on the MLS more than 10 days. And then I'm like, does it have cruddy pictures? If it's got those 2 things, I'm like, oh, there's opportunity here. And so now you start picking apart other things. And that works well for me as an investor. But if you're just trying to pick up a bunch of those, that's tough. And going back to the point you said, I wanted to emphasize is you are completely correct. When you talk about suburbs of Austin, you can't tell you leave Austin to Cedar Park. You can barely tell when you hit Leander. Like maybe there's a couple more trees along the highway, but that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, can we, well, actually, let me ask one other question about kind of like the makeup of Austin. So why is there so much drive to moving to Austin right now? I know it's always the cool city, but tell us what's going on in Austin that's just bringing people in droves.
I think we got a lot of different draw here. It is a cool city. It's a neat place, right? So geographically, we have some nice stuff. Like we get a little bit milder weather, so we don't get as cold as like Dallas does. We don't get as wet, or we don't have the hurricane stuff that Houston has. It's a pretty robust and pretty diverse market. So from a city standpoint, it's a really nice place to find jobs because you have high government sector. Now you have a lot of tech. You've got good medical. You've got manufacturing, distribution. You've got a lot of different things around here that create great opportunity. Austin kind of was this like sleeper watch city for a while because we had some big names. I mean, we had Dell, we had Samsung, we had Oracle, we had a few of these that were kind of here. And then it just started like trickling in. We started getting Google, and we got Facebook. And then for whatever reason, when Apple said we're coming to Austin, it's like everybody just was like, okay, you have my attention. And then within a year, we had Tesla, and then we've had something like 35 headquarters relocate this year alone just to Austin. I think Texas in general is a very business friendly state. And that's going to be a big reason we're able to provide a lot of tax incentives in this state that makes it very appealing for people to do business here. So for business, that's really powerful. As we continue to get more, it makes it easier to continue to provide those, which is like a snowball effect, right? You have more money coming in, you have more people paying taxes, you can afford to give bigger tax relief. So it kind of builds. Austin has, in terms of a city, it's kind of neat too, because we're positioned really in a neat spot. Like we have the river too. So we have like the hillside on one part of Texas on the west side, and you've got hills and trees. You've got the river, which has a lot of just beautiful property alongside of it. You've got activities there. And then it was always trendy. You had the festivals, you had the downtown scenes with music, just always kind of did that. And I think as you just got more and more opportunity, it's like, well, why not? Because it's a great place for us to go to. I think it's a lot of different points, but I think that kind of brings it all together for why.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great description of it and everything that's been going on. Yeah. So let's, I guess, focus on the long-term strategy, and let's play the role that we're going to go out and find just a long-term rental, since that's generally the more popular route, especially among people who are investing long distance. So you invest yourself and you have some long-term rentals there. Can you, I guess, share with us little parts of the cities of like where is going to be really expensive and then where is going to be a little bit more affordable? Because frankly, I see all of Austin as expensive, but I'm comparing it to Indianapolis, which is a Midwestern city, and that's not fair. So
that's fair. Good point.
But yeah, if we could go into one of your properties, you know, for like a deep dive going into the numbers and how it's, you know, what it's like the taxes and what you bought it for and the rent and all that, that would be great as well.
Sure. So to answer the first part, for the city of Austin, it's terrible advice. You could probably throw a dart at the city of Austin. I'm like, that's a good area, right? There's not a lot of areas that you really have to like stay away from. There's a few pockets, and whenever people are looking, I really make it a point to show like just look at this area and make sure it fits with what you want, right? Whether that's you like, does it fit the school ratings? Does it fit the crime mapper or the crime tracking, you know, maps? Does it fit those things? And there's a few pockets where I'm like, I just want you to know this one is probably going to be more of a headache, right? The price is going to be a lot better, but it's going to be more problematic for one reason or another. In general, the west side tends to be more expensive. Central west, northwest, southwest, it all tends to be that way. You also tend to have less foundation problems on that side too. Probably a little more rock, which is why, where you have a lot more clay and soil to the east side of 35. So in terms of really expensive, anything close to downtown, anything close to the water is pretty much just going to be very expensive, to the point where as an investment, unless you're parking just a lot of capital, it really doesn't make sense. It is truly an appreciation game. You're just parking capital and leaving it alone. And you're usually parking quite a bit, because if you buy a 20% down property for $1 million, I guarantee the cash flow is not going to cover that nicely. So most people are putting 40, 45% down, just really locking it up and just sitting on it for whatever many years. The further out you go, the more those numbers get better. That's true Southwest and Northwest as well. So if Austin is too expensive, you start to move a little bit more north, and you go from, you know, your $1 million+ price point into like 600,000, then you go 500, 400, 300 as you get further out. Your cash flow it scales better as you go down in price too. Like that ratio, the rent to purchase price just gets a little bit higher as you go further out. And that's kind of, do you want me to, would it be helpful to kind of talk a little bit more in particular about different areas or particular pockets, or just jump into the like deal deep dive?
No, I mean, I think it sounds from what you're describing, it's pretty straightforward, you know, like the further you go out, you know, the more affordable it's going to be. And generally, Austin doesn't have any really bad areas, you know, that you don't want to be in. I know as a realtor, you're restricted from saying certain things. I guess, you know, I can say from my experience, like generally the very east central side of Austin, historically, like when I was there back in 2000, was probably the rougher side of the city. But since then, when I go and visit family, that has totally changed. It's regentrified, you know, for better or worse. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm sure the east side is a safer place to be today. So if you talk to people who've maybe been to Austin or used to live in Austin 20 years ago and they mention the east side, take that with a grain of salt. So yeah, it just seems like overall Austin is a pretty safe city. You know, it's compared to some other larger cities in the US. So, but yeah.
Comparatively, yes.
Yeah. Well, if we want to go ahead and go into some of your property or a few properties of yours, if you don't mind sharing, if you have any, we could pull it up if you want to. Either you do a screenshot share of maybe if you want to pull it up on Zillow or something like that to just kind of show pictures and where it is on a map. Visuals are always welcome, but share what you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Sure. I can pull up the area for y'all on that one. So we've got a couple. I tried to, you know, we talked about this before when we connected first, you know, not to talk about the ones that were like really great deals, because you don't want people to feel like, oh, it just works out as a home run every time.
Yeah.
And even for stuff, and we'll talk about this one here, the growth that it's had, I'm like, there's a good part of that this last year that was just nice icing on the cake from the market. It's not why we buy it for that hope, because it's like, I love that it did that. That's not in the plan. That's just bonus. So this one, and I'll bring it up on the map after we go through that. It's a single family home. It's in Northwest Austin, so it's almost to Cedar Park. It's a single story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it was 1,700 square feet. We picked this one up for $360,000, and it needed a pretty extensive rehab. There was a smoker that lived there before, so we really wanted, you know, you have to go through, do all the stuff with the ducts. We did kills paint on everything, recoated just to make sure that it was a nice place. We ended up with this one, we got a little creative. It had kind of a dining room that didn't really make sense. Like it has a nice large dining room in the kitchen. So we went ahead and moved that or converted that into an actual full office and just put like double French doors on there. And so that for a work from home, that's kind of a really nice add-on for that particular one. And we really did, we saved the counters, the cabinets. We had to replace the appliances. We replaced the floors. We redid the bathrooms. I think the bathrooms are a relatively inexpensive area that you can redo almost the whole thing, and it looks amazing for usually under $1,000.
Oh.
So that's what we did for that one. I think the total rehab, just for numbers, so we bought it for $360,000. We put about $40,000 into the rehab.
Cool.
Yeah. It's worth, you know, on a good day, $550. If we're like adding how much the market's gone up, it's probably closer to $500 for the actual, like what we were planning it to be at.
That's great. So it sounds like if somebody wanted to try to do the BRRRR method that, there are possibilities for that. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. It currently rents for $2,600. It does pretty nice. It makes a small amount of cash flow, not much. In the calculations, I think in cash flow, as you guys know, really depends how you cut those numbers.
Yeah.
Some people put larger, CapEx budgets in there. They'll put higher maintenance, higher PM, and that really depends. Especially for Austin, there's different. I mean, I'm sure you could do it in other markets too, but here you can do a percentage based. You can do flat fee, right? And so as your rent goes up, those percentage based ones can be rather punishing. You take 6, 8, 10% of 2,600, it gets really punishing. But you do a flat fee, and it just controls it pretty well. So that one does pretty well. We replaced most everything. I mean, we had one that we just kicked ourselves on as the water heater was 3 years old and it apparently broke. So we're like, well, okay, new water heater for the property. But otherwise than that, yeah, it was basically the whole interior redo.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
Sorry, do you property manage all of these yourself? Okay, you have
None of them.
Okay.
Yeah. We have one short-term rental that we self-manage. And we have that one in Cedar Park, which is just outside the north side of Austin there. But everything else, we just have a PM do.
Okay.
And your PM, your PM charges a flat fee. That's what you were saying.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
What fee is it? Do you mind sharing?
They have a tiered system. So you can choose like the basic, the upgraded, or the premium. And you have to choose premium if you have a pool. That would be the only thing. But I think it's like $100, $150, and $250.
Mm-hmm.
So for the 100, it works out pretty well to be able to do that. And in most PMs, you guys probably know, there's usually a trade-off. So if you have like really low fees, you may have higher like renewals or lease-up fees. Some places will charge higher construction and rehab oversight, like a 10% upcharge. So there's always a little bit of a balance, but this one's worked really well for us with that flat fee.
Oh, okay. How long have you been with this one, the property management?
Just over a year.
Oh, okay. Are you open to sharing who they are, or?
Yeah, so we have two different ones that we use for different properties. For the multifamily, we use a different one, and they're actually percentage based. And for the single family, we use another one. And then, of course, ourselves. And to answer your question earlier, we did used to self-manage them, and I'm so glad we don't anymore.
As I get into self-managing.
If you have a talent for it, and some people are good at that, go you. And there are people that there's an investor here that I know in Austin. He does like 26 duplexes by himself. That's That's incredible. It's just not what I like to do.
Yeah, and that's
I don't. Yeah, it's a heavy task for me. That phone would ring and I just roll my eyes and like, that's not what I should be doing then.
Yeah, it's a matter of what you like to do and what you're good at. So, and pick and choose where you need to place those team members.
Well said.
Yeah, awesome.
So when did you? I think did you say you were going to share the numbers? You had something to share, or did you have like a PowerPoint or like a little graph, or was this?
And actually, just these out here. No, I could put that together if that's helpful. Actually,
no, I was wondering. I just didn't know if you were going to share that. The 360 then, when did you buy the property?
We bought this one in March of this year.
Wow.
Okay, awesome. Of 2021. How did you identify this property as something that might work, or if you want to go into that?
So this one, again, was like the price was right. It looked decent. This one we actually found off market. And so we were watching for that one to pop up. The person was wanting to sell. They had a price in mind that they wanted, and we were able to say, okay, if we could do it and make this work for you guys, could that work? Some of it was pretty easy, right? Like one of them was they just wanted a lease back. That's pretty darn easy. That's where you just let the seller stay in the property after the closing for, up to 60 days usually. Perfect, right? We just gave her a lease back and that was fine. For this one, it did have the house didn't look great when you saw the pictures. So it didn't look like it was a good opportunity. But it was a couple of those metrics where you saw like 1,700 square feet and like For 3.2, that's pretty spacious for a single story. Like there's some room in that house there. We tend to look at things kind of above really like 1,300 square feet, because once you start getting below 1,300 square feet for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, that gets pretty tight. So when we saw that everything kind of lined up, we walked the property and then just really asked what they wanted for it and found out if it could work for us. And we had the price, moved forward and bought it, and the rest is history.
It's great.
How did you find it off market? Do you do direct mail yourself or?
Not anymore. So pretty good network of people that do it, whether it's through PMs, investing groups. Sometimes you'll just have other agents, other folks. We bought one off market from another investor once. This would have been a good one too. And they had a problem with their home. The tenant was not paying. They weren't current on rent. And this was during, you couldn't evict somebody and they were kind of panicking, right? And we were able to work out a deal and said, hey, we'll take it from you if you want to sell. And they were like, yes. Again, what do you want for it? Ran the numbers. And then we worked out a deal, took it over, got the tenant out with cash for keys. And that one's now rented out and doing great.
Yeah, that's great. So most of your off-market leads are coming from just networking, it sounds like?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the best way.
Yeah, I agree. So you rented it out. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with an office for $2,600 a month. You said it's just south of Cedar Park, you said? So that's going to be like a B plus probably neighborhood for as far as like the tenants that you're placing.
Yeah, B plus, if not like an A minus. It's a nice little pocket of town. It's got some older homes, and I wouldn't call it an A because that's really, you kind of think of like everything as being just like pristine, but it's a very nice little suburb. It's a good little pocket of Austin. I really like it a lot, and it had the other things too. Like you look at all those metrics. Is it close to a highway that can get people to work? Because it's way out in the country, that's a little less appealing. So it's close to infrastructure. When we did the research on crime's super low. We like the schools that were over there. It just kind of like checked a lot of boxes.
Yeah. So would you say that is kind of like the average rent right now then for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath is $2,600, or did you get a little bit more what the average rent is, or did you go under the average rent to hope for like the long-term gain with the tenant?
Average is tough because it varies in Austin quite a bit. If I'm just being honest, it'll fluctuate a lot. I'd say if you wanted to pick a true average, you're probably closer to somewhere around like 1,800 to 2,000 is probably going to be your average rent. For this one, it's a little bit higher than the rest of it in the area, but it's got brand new appliances, brand new bathrooms, brand new floors. Like it looks really nice. It's well put together. In terms of, I'd say average rent's about there. It's a little higher than the area. For rents in Austin, it's been chronically kind of low. So it's relatively affordable to live in Austin if you're renting. It has been for many, many years. And that tends to be because rent's a lagging measure. So we see home prices can go up very quickly, but rent, it's only on renewals. And most landlords, when they kind of have a great tenant that's paying and it's covering the bills and they're making a profit, kind of don't want to rock the boat, they just leave it alone. So we tend to see rents kind of just be slower to rise. And that when you get enough of a disparity, that's when we start seeing some of those jumps. And Texas has had a lot of that. Both Austin and Dallas saw 11% rent growth this last year. And we're at all-time high occupancy. So we're probably going to see it jump again next year. So we've gone on a couple of our properties and we've encouraged people we work with, look at some of those numbers, really pull the comps, because you can probably push it a little bit higher right now because there's just not much available.
Yeah. And considering just like how hot the Austin market is to buy, it's probably a lot of people moving in or just have to rent initially to just live somewhere.
It did. People couldn't find a place.
Yeah.
Like the market was so competitive. And for a lot of folks, you just started to get classed out of what you could afford. So they turned to rentals, and you hit it spot on. We've seen a huge spillover with all these people that either gave up or couldn't buy, and now they're having to rent. Exactly.
Yeah. So if our investors are still intrigued by Austin and want to give it a go, finding properties. So, it sounds like you come across them off market because of your network. How do you recommend someone new getting started? Because I've heard the scary stories about people putting bids, on houses in Austin, and you're going like almost 100K over, and it's just insane, to be able to buy a house. So, what's your strategy, or what do you recommend for investors trying to get started?
Those were the horror stories this spring. It was pretty bad. It's cooled down a lot. I think a lot of people just collectively said, all right, this is enough. Like, we just can't do this. At that point, you really had to come from another city with lots of money to break into the market, or just be ready to deploy a lot of capital. It's actually really pretty nice right now. In terms of buying, this is actually a pretty sweet spot for people to be buying. I mean, we put 3 under contract in this last week, and they were all at or within asking price of 5,000. So and those are in 300,000 range. So we're not talking about, $1 million house that we got for 5,000. It's very affordable. In terms of finding deals, it really depends on, I think, the criteria. You look at price point, are there particular areas you like? If you knew like, UT is near and dear to my heart, I'd love something close to UT. Great. If you really like that area, let's look over there. If it's just anywhere in Austin, I just want it to have proximity to a highway or Tesla or whatever it is. So you can kind of pick criteria there. There's areas I like because of growth. You see certain trends and things like you have the Domain in Austin, which is kind of like a second downtown. And then you have like the Apple campus. That area and that stretch, I think it's phenomenal. You've got tons of attractions. You've got great proximity with 2 different highways that intersect and cross there. So it's really easy to get in and out. You've got shopping, you've got retail, you've got restaurants, you've got, highway infrastructure, and it's just a lot of jobs nearby. It's hard to see that area and not think it's going to do well, right? It's very strong. Versus you go out further in some other areas, it's a little more of a gamble. I think a really good example right now is Taylor, Texas. Samsung may move out there. They've got the approved incentives for that move. That's great, but it's not there yet. And if it doesn't get approved, it'll probably perform as it's been performing, which is decent, but not stellar. Versus in Austin, you're looking at somewhere between about 4 and 7% appreciation a year for the last 10 years, 4% over the last 40, and that's throwing out last year. So I don't like to include the great year we had last year because that can skew data. That's just what we had beforehand.
Got it. Yeah. Well, this is very good. So it sounds like if people want to get started in Austin, now is the time. Things have cooled off, and maybe start jumping on it immediately before spring rolls around again, because I guess we'll never know. We don't have a crystal ball, but for the most part, spring tends to be the hot season for real estate. So now, when trying to network, are there any RIAs you recommend? Are there any on groups that meet online that you've heard about for people to start making connections?
There are. So the RIAs are really kind of hit miss here. I've been generally not impressed with a lot of them. There's one that does okay, and they meet sporadically. With COVID, everything's been kind of thrown off. So we've kind of had to do the hybrid of sometimes Zoom, sometimes in person. That's nice. A lot of those can feel like pitches and not really useful to, I guess, a lot of the group listening to this, because unless you really want to make the trip down to Austin just to attend one of those. There are some groups you can join. We have some investor groups. There's some good ones on Facebook. Networking, just getting in with some of those different groups or meeting people is really nice too.
Mm-hmm. What are the names of the Facebook ones that you suggest?
There's a couple. One of them that I really like is Investor Above Ground. There's an Investor Underground, but it really kind of turned into just a self-promotion spam fest. But it happens, right? Like it does. And especially as groups get really, really large, that can be tough to, somebody says, something and mentions flooring, and then you've got 30 people that do tile that all respond.
Yeah.
So,
and that's an Austin focused group, the Investor Above Ground. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And they all, you can even look up just some of the, I'd have to jump onto Facebook and see all of the different groups, but there's a couple that are like Austin Investing and Austin Real Estate Investing. I think the Austin Real Estate Investing Facebook group, they'll actually have probably the cleanest amount of like deals that pop up.
Mm.
The only thing I don't like with that though is if you're in that group and there's 13,000 members and somebody posts it, it's not an exclusive deal. Like it's getting just jumped on like piranhas. So while it's nice to be a part of those, there's a downside to that too. And I see that a lot with like the wholesaling off market. It's actually the smaller, medium-sized people that provide really the best deals.
Yeah. Yeah. And then far as like wholesalers go, are there any companies that you would recommend?
Not companies. I actually don't like a lot of big companies. Their
Okay.
margins, I don't like the numbers they run, truthfully. We've
Okay.
got a couple, I'm not going to mention them on this one. I'd be happy to share that with somebody if they ask, but I just don't like the way they run their numbers. When we look at it, I'm like, there's nothing here. Like you're either vastly underestimating the rehab cost,
Mhm.
or you're very overestimating what that ARV is, and that can be really tough. I don't love that. Some of the smaller wholesalers that actually I think find some different niches to get into kind of provide the best deals that I've seen.
Mhm.
It's been tough right now because we went from such a climbing market to now we finally started just a steady plateau. It's hard for the sellers who think like, well, Jim down the street, it went for 100,000 over, so mine should too. Like, yes, well, Jim sold in May, which was great for Jim, not so much for you now. And that hasn't really adjusted well. So I think we've seen some really thin margins on wholesaling recently.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So be wary of any wholesale deals coming in because they're dealing with sellers who think they should be getting a whole lot more for their property than what the market is adjusted to. So, and you could be stuck with that bill with that extra. So, okay, so I guess, so we talked about some of the different ways of networking. So for anybody who wants to get started, I'm sure they're going to want to reach out to you because generally, in my experience, you kind of want to connect with a realtor or a property manager when trying to look into a market. So what is the best way people can contact you?
Email is probably the best. And I don't know if it's better to include that or put that in a post, but it's literally just my name, Bryan, BRYAN, @NOTH team, TEAM.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just putting it. Is that right? I just put it in the comments. So
yeah, that's it.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'll make sure to include that in the post. Oh, actually, one more question though, related to like cost of properties. So I know taxes, Texas does not have income tax, which is really appealing for people who are moving there, but they compensate it with the property tax. So can you give us the example of that property you were telling us about that you bought for 360? How much tax per year would you anticipate you'll have to pay on that one?
Ooh, so that one's going to be less fair because it will change next year, and I expect it to. I think that tax rate is something like, I think it's low twos. I think we're like 2.3%. So the ARV at the time, which it was homesteaded, which usually keeps your tax rate pushed down a little bit, it's probably going to be pretty low. So I think the tax bill for her on record was like $8,000 per year. We'll probably see that jump up a bit depending on how appraisals look when we come around for the tax assessment for the county. We'll probably see it go closer to like 10 to 11. That's kind of what I'm planning for.
Okay.
The tax rate for Austin, that's actually a really good point to hit on. It varies in different areas. We do have higher property tax here. And this is a general rule. Your older areas tend to have lower tax rates. They're established, the infrastructure's in place. For newer and developing areas that they have to put in roads, sewers, piping, electrical, all that, you tend to see a higher tax rate because they're building so much in that area. So some areas tend to be a little higher. Buda, which is down south of Austin, Manor to the east east of Austin can have higher tax rates. Some of those new construction are like 3.2 to 3.4%, which I think that's what's really made places like Maine are really hard to invest, because when you're running the numbers, you're like, God, this is just killing anything I've got. In some of the other areas, like, okay, it kind of works. I can offset this a little bit. So it will depend a lot on the area. You are correct. That's probably the biggest complaint people get for cash flow is I run the numbers and it's killing it every time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, yes. So also people need to be cautious, I guess, when looking at like the current tax rate on a property that's, listed or whatnot, because if it's owner occupied, you can request, homestead, and it dramatically reduces your taxes on a homestead property. So I guess, is there an increase? Do you know unless somebody claims homestead and because I think you have to request that. It's not automatically given to you, if they see that it's owner occupied. I think you have to apply for homestead. But is there a tax adjustment if they know it's an investment property, so the owner doesn't live there? Okay.
No, it just goes back to the normal one.
Okay.
You are correct. The homestead exemption is a really nice one to be able to keep those taxes down. So it helps pretty significantly as owners, and they just increased it this year. It's something to watch out for. That will pull up and say, here's the bill, but pay attention to the tax rate, because that's what's going to be hit on your property. And to be fair, they've gotten pretty good. The county assessors now have access to the MLS, so they've gotten pretty darn it. When you get your property assessment, you're like, this is pretty good, right? This is a good CMA. They're pretty spot on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't see a lot there. And I think it kind of coming back to Austin for the long term, again, if most people, the first year to 2 years, it's not really stellar. And I'd say that for almost all of my properties, the first year, it's not really great. Sometimes if we have a good year, it kind of catches up by year 2, but usually around year 3, it's actually cash flowing decently, because the rent growth will actually outpace that. And at the end of the day, if you are losing money on cash flow because the property has gone up in so much value that your taxes are going up, that's a great problem to have, because you likely have a ton of equity in the property. So I think it's important when you're assessing those options for buying, does it work as a hold, right? Can it make sense, right? I don't like looking at properties where you're like, oh, it loses $700 a month. Man, if you can float that, fine. I'm okay with like 100, 150. Like at the end of the year, if I'm paying $1,800 and I had what I expected to be just a normal performance year, I'm okay with holding that as a hold cost for the property. If I'm bleeding $500 a month, that's not okay. For me as an investor, I can't. And we make a lot of those work by just doing 25% down on single family, because you get a slightly better rate when you go a little bit higher. And that usually helps pencil out pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah, good point about taxes.
How often do they do the assessments? Does the city
every year? Yeah, it's what is death and taxes, right? They never miss, like always. And they didn't increase them much this last year. They will do different tax assessments to talk about how much they're going to raise or lower. So as an area gets built out, they may lower it, or they may keep it. Buda just repassed theirs and kept it at 3.4 for some of their new builds. I kind of rolled my eyes thinking like, it's going to hurt growth. So it does depend, but they will do it every single year.
Yeah. Let's just hope they don't change it biannually with the rate of things are going.
No, they've got so much growth. I can't imagine they're struggling.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hope, is as it continues to build out, it allows everybody to kind of distribute that a little bit more, and hopefully we see it continue to drop.
Yeah.
Because it's come up before in legislation that with the value of homes, we may be able to start pushing tax rates down a little bit, just because there should be enough to cover it.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I think you've brought in so much information for people to have a good grasp on what they're getting into with the Austin market. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and personal experience.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So again, if people want to reach out, they can email you at Bryan at, is it Noth? Is that how you pronounce it? Your last name? Noth?
It's no.
Oh, no, sorry. I keep thinking Noth in my
No.
head, but I was like, no, he said it differently. So Bryan at Noth, Noth team.com. So I'll put that as well in the comments when we post this for people to watch at their leisure. But yeah, I hope you join the long distance real estate investors group. I think you have already, maybe.
I have, yeah. I joined
That's
in.
right.
I
So
like y'all's group. It's really well, like it's very well mannered too. Like people are, it's like it's really well done. It's like, this is a nice group. I'm impressed.
yeah, we've got a great community going on,
That's
and
awesome.
I mean, it's still in its baby stage, you know, we have about 1,400 members, which compared to some groups, it's still small, which I like right now because you really get some engaging conversations. So I'm glad you're on it. And so people can tag you if they have any questions about the Austin market. You can kind of be our Austin guru, if you don't mind, for the group, for them to follow up. So. But
absolutely,
yeah, well, we really appreciate all your time, and we look forward to engaging with you on the group. And I'm sure you'll get quite a few people reaching out with either follow-up questions or just wanting to get started. So I'll share with you when we post that.
I'm excited. It's whether to be able to help or just connect. I mean, as you guys know, I think the investing world's a lot smaller than we kind of give it credit sometimes. And it's just great to meet people that are like-minded, have similar goals. Like you learn and grow and draw inspiration. It's terrific. So even if it's not just we want to invest in Austin, it's great to connect with folks.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this market spotlight on Austin, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
All righty. Well, thanks so much. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second.